The Galactic Zoological Preserve sat at the edge of Arcturus Station like a massive steel fortress floating in the darkness of space. Inside its walls lived the most dangerous creatures the galaxy had ever seen. Beasts from 100 different worlds. Predators that could tear through metal. Things that gave even the bravest alien soldiers nightmares. But nobody talked about Sector 7 anymore. They just pretended it didn't exist. The section had been sealed off for almost 3 full cycles now. That's about 9 Earth months. The automated cleaning systems had broken down weeks ago, and nobody wanted to fix them. The feeding drones got destroyed every time they tried to enter. Even the security cameras kept getting smashed, one by one, until only a handful remained working. Inside that forsaken place lived something the galaxy had labeled as absolutely impossible to handle. They called it the Karath. Imagine a lion but not like the ones from Earth. This creature stood nearly 12 feet tall at the shoulder. Its body rippled with muscle beneath fur that looked like it was woven from shadows and midnight. Instead of a normal mane, thick tendrils grew from its neck and head. These weren't soft or decorative. Each one could slice through solid titanium like a hot knife through butter. The beast had 6 powerful legs instead of 4, and each paw ended in claws that retracted and extended like switchblades. But the worst part, the part that made grown aliens refuse to even look at the surveillance screens, were its eyes. They glowed with an eerie bioluminescent light, burning like twin suns filled with pure rage. When the Karath looked at you through those eyes, you felt it in your bones. You knew you were staring at death itself. The creature had been captured from a death world called Terminus 7. Death worlds were exactly what they sounded like. Planets where everything evolved to kill everything else. Where gravity crushed your bones and the atmosphere tried to poison you. Where every plant had thorns and every animal had teeth. The Karath had been the apex predator there. The thing that even other predators feared. The official report said it had slaughtered an entire research colony. 47 scientists from different species, all dead in a single night. The survivors, the few who made it to their ships in time, reported something that sounded like a nightmare. The creature moved through their base like a ghost, appearing and disappearing in the shadows. It showed intelligence, strategy, purpose. This wasn't some mindless animal. It was a hunter that thought and planned. After months of effort and the loss of an entire military squad, they finally captured it using heavy tranquilizers and stasis fields. They brought it to Arcturus Station because, well, where else do you put the galaxy's most dangerous specimen? For the first few weeks, the station's handlers tried everything. The Vrelians, a species known for their skill with dangerous animals, attempted to establish dominance. The Karath nearly killed 3 of them. The insectoid Thorns, who communicated through pheromones and could usually calm any creature, tried their techniques. The beast showed no response except fury. Robot handlers got torn apart. Stun weapons only made it angrier. Tranquilizer darts seemed to barely slow it down. One keeper tried using sonic frequencies that should have pacified it. The Karath destroyed the equipment and left claw marks 10 inches deep in the reinforced walls. After the incident where it actually bent the bars of its containment field with pure strength, the station director made a decision. Seal it off. Let it rot. Eventually, it would die and they could dispose of the body and forget this whole mess ever happened. So they shut down Sector 7. They rerouted all the automated systems. They posted warning signs in 17 different languages. They told everyone on the station to stay far away from that section. And they waited. Inside that sealed enclosure, the Karath deteriorated. Its magnificent coat became matted with filth and old blood. Waste piled up in the corners because nobody came to clean it. The creature paced endlessly, its rage building day by day. It stopped eating the low-quality nutrient blocks they shot through the automated dispenser. It attacked the walls until its claws bled. It roared challenges that echoed through the empty corridors, roars that nobody answered. The few functioning cameras showed a creature descending into madness. But nobody watched those feeds anymore. Nobody cared. Then, on a Tuesday morning, station time, a transport ship docked at Arcturus Station. Among the usual supplies and replacement staff, one person stepped off who would change everything. Dr. Emily Brooks walked through the station's main corridor with a simple duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She was human, which already made her unusual. Humans were still fairly new to the galactic community. Most species saw them as interesting but unremarkable. Soft creatures from a medium-gravity world with no natural weapons or armor. Emily had spent 15 years working with Earth's most dangerous animals. Tigers, grizzly bears, crocodiles. She'd rehabilitated animals that other handlers had given up on. Animals that had attacked humans, that had been labeled as killers, that everyone said should be put down. She'd save them all. When she arrived at the station director's office for her briefing, he looked exhausted. He was a Vrelian named Corvan with gray scales and tired eyes. He pulled up the files on the various specimens she'd be working with, explaining protocols and safety measures. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned Sector 7. Emily asked to see the file. Corvan hesitated, then pulled it up on the screen. He showed her the incident reports, the failed handling attempts, the casualty list. He explained that the sector was sealed and that no one was expected to deal with it anymore. Emily sat there silently, scrolling through the information. She watched the old video footage of the Kareth, seeing past the rage and violence. She noticed things others had missed. The way the creature flinched at loud sounds. How it retreated to the darkest corner when the lights were too bright. The pacing pattern that suggested not just anger but deep anxiety. She looked up at Corvan and said 3 words that made his face go pale. "I'll handle it." The director stared at her like she'd just volunteered to jump into a star. He explained that it was impossible. That the creature was beyond help. That she would certainly die if she went anywhere near it. Emily smiled politely and repeated her statement. She would handle it. Word spread through the station like wildfire. The human was going to enter Sector 7. Alone. Unarmed. Everyone thought she was insane. Her AI assistant, after calculating the variables, informed her that her survival probability was 0.003%. Basically zero. But Emily had learned something during her years working with Earth's predators. Something the galaxy didn't seem to understand. There were no bad animals. Only frightened, hurt, or misunderstood ones. And she was going to prove it. Emily stood outside the sealed entrance to Sector 7, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind her, what seemed like half the station's population had gathered to watch through the observation windows. Some looked curious. Most looked horrified. A few were already recording, probably expecting to capture her death on video. She carried only a small pack with her. Inside were grooming brushes, cleaning supplies, and a tranquilizer gun that she'd already decided she wouldn't use unless absolutely necessary. Tranquilizers had failed before, and more importantly, they sent the wrong message. You don't build trust by drugging someone. Corvan stood beside the control panel, his scaled hand hovering over the release button. He looked at her one last time, his expression making it clear he thought this was suicide. "Dr. Brooks, I'm begging you to reconsider. We can find another way." "We can." "Open it," Emily said quietly. The massive door began to slide open with a hiss of hydraulics. The smell hit her first. Rot, waste, old blood, and something else. Something wild and furious. The lights inside had mostly been destroyed, leaving only emergency strips that cast everything in a dim red glow. Emily took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door sealed shut behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. For a moment there was only silence. Emily's eyes adjusted to the darkness. The enclosure was huge, maybe 50 meters across, with high ceilings and what used to be environmental enrichment structures. Now everything was destroyed. Torn apart. The walls were covered in deep claw marks. In some places she could see where the Kareth had actually dented the reinforced metal. Then she heard it. A low growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It vibrated through the floor, through her bones, through her very soul. Emily slowly turned her head and saw it. The Kareth emerged from the shadows like a nightmare becoming real. It was even bigger than the videos had shown. Those burning eyes locked onto her, and she felt every instinct in her body screaming at her to run, to hide, to do anything except stand there. But she didn't move. The creature stalked forward, its 6 legs moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. Its obsidian tendrils rose up like a cobra's hood, sharp and deadly. Dried blood and filth matted its once magnificent fur. Emily could see old wounds that had never been properly treated, infections that had gone untreated. This wasn't a monster. This was a suffering animal that had been abandoned. The Kareth suddenly charged. It moved faster than Emily's eyes could track. 1 second it was 20 meters away. The next it was right in front of her, those massive claws raised high ready to strike. She could smell its breath, hot and rancid. Could see every tooth in its open jaws. Emily did something that went against every survival instinct humans had developed over millions of years. She dropped to her knees. She made herself small. She turned her head to the side, exposing her neck, and she closed her eyes. Then she began to hum. It was an old song her grandmother had taught her back on a ranch in Montana. A simple melody that Grammy used to sing to spooked horses during thunderstorms. Emily had hummed it to frightened dogs, to injured wolves, to a tiger that had been abused in a circus. Now she hummed it to an alien predator that could kill her in a heartbeat. The Karatha's claws stopped inches from her throat. Emily could feel the air displacement, feel the heat from its body. But the killing blow never came. She kept humming, kept her eyes closed, kept every muscle relaxed despite the terror flooding through her system. Through her closed eyelids, she sensed the creature moving, circling her. The growling continued, but there was something different in it now. Confusion. Maybe even curiosity. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Emily's knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor. Her throat grew dry from humming the same melody over and over. But she didn't stop. Didn't move. The Karath kept circling, testing her, trying to understand what she was. In all its time in captivity, nothing had ever responded to violence this way. Everything else had fought back or fled. This small, soft creature did neither. It just made itself vulnerable and sang. Outside, the crowd watched in stunned silence. The station security chief had his hand on the emergency extraction button, ready to send in drones to retrieve her body. But minutes turned into hours and somehow, impossibly, the human kept living. Emily's AI assistant whispered through her earpiece, calculating updated survival probabilities, each one slightly better than the last. But Emily tuned it out. She focused entirely on the creature, on projecting calm, on showing that she meant no threat. Finally, after 6 hours of kneeling, Emily heard the Karath retreat. The footsteps moved away, back toward the darkest corner of the enclosure. She carefully opened her eyes. The beast sat in the shadows, those glowing eyes fixed on her. Watching. Waiting. Emily slowly reached into her pack and pulled out one of the brushes. Not to use on the creature, not yet, but to show what she'd come here to do. She turned away from the Karath, giving it her back, another gesture of trust and submission. Then she started cleaning. She worked methodically, clearing away the waste nearest to her. The smell was overwhelming, but she pushed through it. She scraped filth off the floor, collected broken debris, organized it into a pile near the entrance. She worked steadily, calmly, all while continuing to hum that old melody. She didn't approach the creature. Didn't even look at it directly. She just cleaned as if the massive predator watching her every move didn't exist. Hours passed. Emily's muscles screamed in protest. Sweat soaked through her clothes. Her hands developed blisters from the scrub brush. But she kept working. The Karath never attacked. Just watched. When Emily finally allowed herself a break, she sat down right there on the floor she'd cleaned. She pulled out a canteen and drank slowly, still not looking at the creature. Then she reached into her pack and pulled out something she'd prepared. Food. But not the standard nutrient blocks the station had been giving it. Emily had spent the last week researching Death World carnivore biology. She'd prepared raw meat from a protein source as close to the Karatha's natural diet as she could find, seasoned with minerals and supplements its body desperately needed. She placed the food on the clean section of floor, far from where she sat. Then she moved back to the entrance and signaled to be let out. The door opened. Emily stepped through without ever turning her back to the creature. The moment she was clear, the door sealed shut again. The crowd that had gathered erupted into shocked conversation. She'd survived. The human had actually survived. Corvan approached, his expression somewhere between amazement and disbelief. What did you accomplish in there? It still wanted to kill you. Emily looked back at the screen showing the interior of Sector 7. On camera, they could see the Karath slowly approaching the food she'd left. It sniffed cautiously, then began to eat. I accomplished first contact, Emily said simply. I showed it that not everything in this universe wants to hurt it. She looked at the creature on the screen, seeing the way it devoured the proper food, the first decent meal it had probably eaten in months. And tomorrow, she continued, we'll take the next step. The station's medical officer, a human named Dr. Rachel Foster, approached with a medical scanner. Your stress hormones are off the charts. Your heart rate hit dangerous levels at least 4 times. You should be traumatized. Emily smiled tiredly. Scared isn't the same as traumatized. Fear means you're alive and paying attention. She watched the screen a moment longer, then headed toward her quarters. Tomorrow would come early and she had a lot of work ahead of her. Behind her, the entire station buzzed with one question. What would the crazy human do next? Emily returned to Sector 7 the next morning at exactly the same time. Routine mattered with traumatized animals. Predictability built trust. The food from yesterday was gone. Every scrap eaten. That was a good sign. It meant the Karatha's body was accepting proper nutrition again, and more importantly, it was accepting what Emily offered. When the door opened this time, Emily noticed something different. The creature didn't charge. It stayed in its corner, those glowing eyes tracking her movements, but it didn't attack. Progress. Emily entered with the same calm energy as before. She carried her cleaning supplies and another portion of properly prepared food. This time she also brought something new, a portable speaker playing soft, ambient sounds from Earth. Rainfall. Forest winds. Gentle thunder. She set up in the same spot as yesterday and began cleaning the next section. The work was disgusting and exhausting, but she never complained. She just hummed her grandmother's melody and scrubbed away months of neglect. Hours passed. The Kareth watched from the shadows, never approaching, never retreating. Just watching. Emily worked 5 hours that day. Then 6 the next. Then 7. Each day she cleaned a little more of the enclosure. Each day she left food that the creature devoured once she was gone. Each day she hummed that same simple tune until it echoed through the space like a promise. By the end of the first week she'd cleaned nearly a third of the massive enclosure. The Kareth had stopped growling when she entered. That was huge. It meant she was becoming familiar. Not a threat. Just a presence. The station's other handlers thought she was wasting her time. They gathered at the observation windows less frequently now. The novelty had worn off. Sure, the human hadn't died yet, but she also hadn't actually accomplished anything real. The creature still wouldn't let her near it. Corvan visited her quarters one evening looking concerned. "Dr. Brooks, you've been at this for 2 weeks now. The council is asking questions. They want to know when you'll move on to the other specimens you were hired to work with." Emily looked up from her research notes. She'd been studying Death World pack behavior, trying to understand the Karetha's social needs. "Tell them I am working with other specimens. This is my primary assignment until it's done." "But you're just cleaning. Any maintenance drone could." "Any maintenance drone would be destroyed in 30 seconds, Emily interrupted gently. "I'm not just cleaning, Director. I'm building a relationship." Corvan left shaking his head, but Emily didn't let it bother her. She knew what she was doing. This was how it worked. Slowly. Patiently. On the animal's terms, not hers. Week 3 brought the first real breakthrough. Emily was scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain near the center of the enclosure when she felt it. That sensation of being watched more intently than usual. She kept working, keeping her movements slow and predictable, but her heart rate picked up. The Kareth was moving. Not circling at a distance like it usually did. Actually moving closer. Emily focused on her breathing. Slow and steady. She kept humming, kept scrubbing, gave no indication that she'd noticed the massive predator approaching from behind. The footsteps stopped. Emily could feel the heat radiating from the creature's body. It was close. Maybe 3 meters away. Closer than it had ever been while she was working. She wanted desperately to turn around to see what it was doing, but she forced herself to stay focused on her task. Trust required vulnerability. Minutes passed. The Kareth didn't attack. It just stood there, and Emily could hear something new in its breathing. Not aggression. Curiosity maybe. Or something else she couldn't quite identify. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, the creature moved away. Emily released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. The creature had chosen to approach. Had chosen to investigate her while she was vulnerable. That was trust, even if it was just a tiny seed of it. Week 4 changed everything. Emily entered the enclosure as usual. She'd brought fresh bedding material this time, real fiber-based stuff that would be more comfortable than the bare metal floor. She was arranging it in one corner when she heard the footsteps again. Closer this time. Much closer. Emily froze, her hands still holding the bedding material. She could feel hot breath on the back of her neck. The Kareth had moved directly behind her, close enough that she could smell it. Not the rot and filth from before, but its actual scent. Something wild and earthy, like a forest after rain. Her AI assistant's voice crackled urgently in her earpiece. "Emily, threat assessment critical. The creature is in kill range. Recommend immediate." Emily reached up and turned off the earpiece. She stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The Karetha's breath ruffled her hair. She could hear its heartbeat, strong and steady. One wrong move, one sign of fear or aggression, and she'd be dead before she could blink. But Emily didn't run. She didn't panic. Instead, she did something that made everyone watching from the observation deck gasp in horror. She slowly reached her hand backward, palm up, holding one of the grooming brushes. The offer hung in the air. An invitation. A question asked without words. The Kareth sniffed the brush. Emily could feel its nose against her hand, cool and slightly damp. Then, so gently it seemed impossible for a creature this massive, It pressed its head against her palm. Permission granted. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the brush to the creature's head. She found a spot behind what would be its ear and began to brush, slowly and carefully. The fur was still matted in places, tangled with old debris, but underneath she could feel the muscle and warmth of a living being. The kareth made a sound. Not a growl. Something else entirely. A deep, rumbling vibration that started in its chest and filled the entire space. It took Emily a moment to realize what it was. Purring. The creature was purring. She worked carefully, brushing around its ears, along its neck, avoiding the sharp tendrils but grooming the softer fur between them. The kareth leaned into her touch, its eyes half closing. All that rage, all that violence, melted away under the simple comfort of being cared for. Emily lost track of time. She groomed the creature for what might have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. Her arms ached, but she didn't stop. This moment was too precious, too important. Finally, the kareth pulled away. Not aggressively, just naturally, the way a cat might step away when it's had enough petting. It looked at Emily for a long moment with those glowing eyes, and she could have sworn she saw something different in them now. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. The creature walked away, and Emily watched as it did something that made her want to cry. It went to the cleaning station she'd installed weeks ago, the one it had been ignoring all this time, and it used it. It actually cleaned itself, using the water jets and drying stations. The kareth was choosing cleanliness. Choosing comfort. Choosing to care for itself again. Emily stood up on shaky legs and signaled to be let out. When the door opened, she stepped through to find absolute chaos. The observation deck was packed with beings from dozens of different species. Everyone was talking at once, pointing at screens, pulling up recordings. Dr. Rachel Foster ran up to her, eyes wide. Emily, do you have any idea what you just did? That was impossible. Every xenobiologist in 3 sectors said that creature couldn't be reached. Emily smiled tiredly. It was never impossible. It just required something most species forgot how to give. What's that? Patience, time, and the understanding that healing can't be rushed. She looked back at the screen showing Sector 7. The kareth was lying in the bedding she'd brought, its body relaxed in a way it hadn't been since its capture. The broadcast of what happened spread through the station's networks within hours. By the next day it had reached other stations. Within a week, beings across 36 planets had seen footage of the human grooming the monster. Emily became famous overnight, but she didn't care about that. She cared about the work. And the work was just beginning. Because now that trust had been established, the real healing could start. Emily's success with the kareth should have been celebrated. Instead, it created problems she never expected. Director Corvan called her into his office 3 days after the grooming breakthrough. His face looked tense, his scales duller than usual. Behind him stood 2 members of the Galactic Zoological Council, their expressions unreadable. Dr. Brooks, Corvan began, his voice formal and cold. The council has some concerns about your methods with the Sector 7 specimen. Emily sat down slowly, sensing trouble. What kind of concerns? One of the council members, a tall being with crystalline features, spoke up. Your approach lacks proper scientific protocol. You haven't used any of the standard containment procedures. You've refused technological assistance. Frankly, your methods appear dangerously primitive. The other council member, a floating entity that communicated through translated thought patterns, added, more concerning is what your success implies about our previous handling methods. If this creature could be reached through such simple means, it raises uncomfortable questions. And there it was. The real issue. Emily leaned back in her chair, understanding flooding through her. You're not concerned about my safety or my methods. You're worried about looking bad. Corvan's face tightened. That's not. It is exactly that, Emily interrupted, her voice calm but firm. I've proven that the kareth isn't some mindless monster. Which means someone has to take responsibility for the 9 months it spent suffering in that cell. Someone has to explain why it was abandoned instead of helped. The room went silent. The crystalline council member's surface began to shimmer with agitation. You overstep, human. The creature killed 47 researchers. It is dangerous. It was dangerous, Emily corrected. And I'd like to know more about those deaths. I've requested the full incident report 3 times now, and each time I've been denied access. Why? Corvan stood up abruptly. Those files are classified for security reasons. This meeting is about your future conduct, Dr. Brooks, not about questioning council decisions. But Emily wasn't backing down. Something had been bothering her since she first read the kareth's file. The story didn't add up. Predators didn't just attack without reason, especially intelligent ones. I want to see those files, Director. If I'm going to continue working with the Kareth, I need to understand what actually happened. The meeting ended badly. Emily was given a formal warning about maintaining proper respect for authority and was told to limit her contact with the Kareth to twice weekly supervised sessions. New safety protocols would be implemented immediately. Emily left the office angry but not defeated. She had allies on the station now. Other humans who'd been watching her progress with interest. That evening, she met with 3 of them in a quiet corner of the station's human quarters. Jack Peterson, a maintenance engineer with 20 years of station experience. Dr. Rachel Foster, who'd been treating Emily for the various injuries and exhaustion from her work. And Lisa Chin, a data analyst who worked in the station's information systems. They're trying to bury this, Emily said, pacing the small room. They're afraid of what my success means. It makes them look incompetent at best, cruel at worst. Jack nodded, his weathered face serious. I've been on this station long enough to know how things work. The council protects itself first, always. If you're making them look bad, they'll find a way to shut you down. Can we access those classified files? Emily asked Lisa. The data analyst bit her lip. Maybe. But it would be risky. If I get caught, I lose my job and probably face legal action. I'm not asking you to break the law, Emily said quickly. But is there anything public we can access? Cross-references, related reports, anything that might give us more information? Lisa thought for a moment. There might be something. Supply requisitions are public record. If I look at what the research colony on Terminus 7 ordered in the months before the incident, it might tell us something. Over the next week, while Emily continued her carefully monitored sessions with the Kareth, Lisa dug through databases. What she found made Emily's blood run cold. The research colony hadn't been studying Death World ecosystems like the official report claimed. They'd been running a breeding program. Specifically, they were trying to capture and breed apex predators for sale to private collectors and military contractors. The pieces fell into place. The Kareth hadn't attacked randomly. It had been defending its young. Emily confronted Corvan with the evidence. The director's face went pale. Where did you get this information? Does it matter? It's true, isn't it? The Kareth had cubs. The researchers tried to take them. That's why it attacked. Corvan slumped in his chair. For a moment he looked old and tired. Yes, 3 cubs. They were sold before anyone could stop it. The whole operation was illegal, but by the time the council investigated, the evidence had been destroyed and the cubs were gone. The researchers who survived claimed they'd been attacked without provocation. It was easier to believe them than to admit we'd allowed illegal breeding operations on a protected world. Where are the cubs now? I don't know. The sales records were erased. Dr. Brooks, you need to let this go. This goes very high up, involves very powerful people. If you push this, you'll be destroyed. But Emily couldn't let it go. She shared everything she'd learned with the small but growing human community on the station. They began documenting everything, building a comprehensive case. Not just about the Kareth, but about systemic problems and how the Galactic Zoological Council operated. That's when things got dangerous. Emily arrived for her scheduled session with the Kareth one morning to find the enclosure's environmental controls had been changed. The temperature had been dropped to near freezing, uncomfortable for the creature. When she protested, she was told it was a necessary safety upgrade. The next day, the food quality was reduced back to the basic nutrient blocks. Emily brought proper food herself, only to have it confiscated at the entrance for contamination concerns. Then came the incident that almost killed her. Emily was in the middle of a grooming session, the Kareth relaxed and trusting beside her, when alarms suddenly blared. Before she could react, vents in the ceiling opened and gas began flooding the enclosure. Sedative gas, thick and yellow. Her earpiece crackled. Emergency protocols activated. Exit immediately, Dr. Brooks. But Emily saw what was happening. This was an emergency protocol. The gas was concentrated directly over where she and the Kareth were sitting. This was deliberate. I'm not leaving, she said into her comm. Dr. Brooks, the sedative will render you unconscious in 90 seconds. Exit now. The Kareth was already affected, its movements sluggish. But even drugged, even barely able to stand, the creature did something that made Emily's heart break and soar at the same time. It positioned itself over her. Its massive body became a shield, its thick fur filtering some of the gas. The creature was protecting her, even as the sedative dragged it toward unconsciousness. Emily wrapped her arms around the Karetha's neck, pressing her face into its fur to breathe through the slightly filtered air. "I've got you," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you." Up in the control room, Jack Peterson had noticed the unauthorized gas release. He killed the system manually, physically ripping out control cables when his digital commands were overridden. The gas stopped flowing and emergency air scrubbers kicked in. Emily and the Kareth both survived, but barely. The incident was captured on surveillance cameras. Within hours, it had leaked to news networks across multiple systems. The footage showed everything: the deliberate gas release, Emily's refusal to abandon the creature, and the Kareth protecting her with its own body. Public outrage exploded. How could the Galactic Zoological Council allow such treatment? Who authorized the gas release? Why was a human handler being put in danger? The video went viral across dozens of species networks. Humans in particular rallied around Emily's story. Here was one of their own, showing compassion and courage in the face of bureaucratic cruelty. The footage of the Kareth protecting Emily became symbolic. Even a so-called monster understood loyalty and gratitude better than the authorities. 3 days later, the Galactic Council announced a formal investigation. Corvan was suspended pending review. And Emily received a message that changed everything. It was from a private investigator working in the outer colonies. He'd seen the news coverage and had information about the cubs. 2 of them were still alive. He knew where they were. Emily sat in her quarters, staring at the coordinates on her screen, and made a decision. She was going to bring those cubs home. Whatever it took. Whatever the cost. The Kareth deserved its family back. The Galactic Zoological Council arrived at Arcturus Station 2 weeks after the gas incident. They came in an official transport, bringing with them investigators, auditors, and enough bureaucratic weight to shut down the entire operation if they wanted to. Emily stood in the observation deck, watching their ship dock, her stomach tight with nerves. Everything she'd worked for came down to this moment. Behind her, Jack, Rachel, and Lisa waited quietly, offering silent support. "You ready for this?" Jack asked. Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure if ready was the right word. She'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing her case, gathering evidence, and most importantly, working with the Kareth to demonstrate just how far they'd come together. The hearing took place in the station's main conference hall. Council members from a dozen different species sat in a semicircle, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Corvan sat off to the side, looking diminished and tired. Several other station administrators were there too, clearly nervous about their own positions. The head investigator, a species Emily didn't recognize with flowing tentacles and multiple eyes, opened the proceedings. "We are here to assess the handling of specimen K77, commonly called the Kareth, and to investigate allegations of improper conduct by station personnel." What followed was 3 hours of testimony. Various handlers described their failed attempts to manage the creature. Medical staff detailed the injuries it had caused. Corvan gave his account of the decision to seal Sector 7. Throughout it all, the council members took notes and asked pointed questions. Then it was Emily's turn. She stood before them, a single human facing the combined authority of galactic governance, and she didn't flinch. "Council members, with respect, everyone here has been asking the wrong question. You've been asking how to control the Kareth. You should have been asking why it needed controlling in the first place." She pulled up holographic displays showing the research she'd done. Death world ecology. Predator social structures. The specific biology and behavior patterns of apex carnivores. Then she showed them something else, something Lisa had helped her dig up. Medical scans of the Kareth from when it first arrived at the station. Not just the obvious injuries from its capture, but something deeper. Hormone levels indicating extreme stress. Brain activity patterns consistent with grief. Physical markers of a creature that had recently given birth. This wasn't a monster that attacked for no reason, Emily said, her voice steady and clear. This was a mother defending her children. The research colony on Terminus 7 was running an illegal breeding operation. They tried to steal the Karetha's cubs. It fought back as any parent would. Murmurs rippled through the council. One member, a being composed of semi-solid energy, pulsed brighter. "These are serious allegations. Do you have proof?" Emily nodded to Lisa, who pulled up the supply requisitions, communication logs, and financial records they'd pieced together. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Specialized equipment for containing juvenile specimens. Communications about valuable inventory. Money transfers to known exotic animal traders. The cubs were sold, Emily continued. 3 of them. The council knew about it, or at least suspected, but it was easier to label the Kareth as dangerous and forget about it than to admit they'd failed to prevent illegal trafficking on a protected world. The room exploded into arguments. Council members demanded answers. Some tried to deflect blame. Others called for Emily to be sanctioned for making such accusations. But the head investigator raised a tentacle for silence. "Dr. Brooks, you've made serious claims about the creature's nature and our handling of it. Can you demonstrate the validity of your approach?" Emily had been waiting for this. "Yes, I can. Right now, if you'll allow it." 20 minutes later, the entire council stood in the observation deck overlooking Sector 7. The space had been transformed over the past months. Clean, organized, with proper environmental enrichment. In the center, the Kareth rested on soft bedding, its coat now gleaming and healthy, those obsidian tendrils flowing like silk instead of weapons. "I'm going in," Emily announced. "Alone. No weapons, no safety equipment. I want you to see what understanding and compassion can accomplish." Before anyone could object, she was through the door. The Karetha's head lifted immediately. Those glowing eyes fixed on Emily, and for the council members watching, the sight was terrifying. They'd all read the reports about this creature's kill count. They'd seen footage of its violence. But what happened next shocked them into silence. The Kareth stood and walked toward Emily, not stalking like a predator, but moving with obvious recognition and what could only be called affection. When it reached her, it lowered its massive head and pressed against her chest. Emily wrapped her arms around it, and the deep rumbling purr was audible even through the observation glass. For the next 30 minutes, Emily demonstrated the trust they'd built. She examined the creature's teeth, something that would require heavy sedation with most dangerous specimens. She checked its paws, grooming between the claws where debris could cause infection. She even climbed onto its back, and the Kareth walked calmly around the enclosure, as gentle as a horse giving a child a ride. The council watched in absolute amazement. This wasn't control through fear or force. This was genuine partnership built on mutual respect and care. When Emily emerged from the enclosure, the head investigator approached her. "Dr. Brooks, what you've accomplished is remarkable. But it doesn't change the fact that 3 cubs are still missing. Without reuniting this creature with its offspring, the rehabilitation is incomplete." Emily took a deep breath. This was the moment. "I know where 2 of them are. I have coordinates and evidence of illegal possession. I'm formally requesting council authority to retrieve them." What followed was hours of debate, but the public pressure was enormous. The footage of Emily and the Kareth had been broadcast across hundreds of worlds. Billions of beings from countless species had watched the human's compassion and the creature's transformation. The council couldn't refuse without massive backlash. 3 days later, Emily was on a ship heading to the outer colonies with a full recovery team. Jack insisted on coming along. Rachel joined too in case the cubs needed medical attention. Even Lisa came, documenting everything for the official record. The first cub was found on a private estate owned by a wealthy collector. He'd kept it in a small cage, malnourished and terrified. The second was in slightly better condition, owned by someone who at least tried to care for it but had no idea what it actually needed. Both cubs were confiscated, their owners facing serious legal consequences. The third cub was never found. The records suggested it hadn't survived the first year after being taken from its mother. That loss hit Emily hard, but she focused on the 2 they'd saved. Bringing the cubs back to Arcturus Station took 2 weeks. Emily spent that time working with them, helping them recover physically and psychologically from their trauma. They were cautious around her at first, but eventually, they began to respond to the same gentle patience she'd shown their mother. The reunion was scheduled as a public event. News crews from dozens of networks set up cameras around Sector 7's observation deck. Beings from across the galaxy tuned in to watch. Emily brought the first cub through the enclosure door. It was still small, maybe half the size of its mother, but growing healthy now under proper care. The cub hesitated at the threshold, unsure. Then the Kareth saw it. The sound that came from the mother was unlike anything Emily had heard before. Not a growl or a purr, but something primal and full of emotion. The cub responded immediately, crying out in recognition, and suddenly they were running toward each other. The collision was gentle despite the size difference. The mother surrounded her cub with her body, her tendrils wrapping protectively around it. She nuzzled and groomed, checking every inch to make sure it was real and whole. The cub pressed against her, making small sounds that were somehow both heartbreaking and joyful. Emily retrieved the second cub, and the reunion repeated. The mother couldn't seem to believe it, kept looking between her 2 returned children as if afraid they'd disappear. Then she looked at Emily, and in those glowing eyes, there was unmistakable understanding. Gratitude. Recognition. Trust. Emily knelt down, and all three creatures came to her. The mother touched her head to Emily's forehead in a gesture that felt almost ceremonial. The cubs, taking their cue from their mother, did the same. Across the galaxy, billions watched the footage. Many wept, regardless of their species. This was more than just a rescue story. It was proof that compassion transcended biology, that understanding could bridge any gap, that even the fiercest creature could be reached with patience and love. The council formally apologized for the mishandling of the Kareth case. New protocols were established for the treatment of all specimens in galactic care. Corvan was allowed to return to a reduced position, having cooperated with the investigation. The real perpetrators of the illegal breeding operation faced criminal charges. But more importantly, Emily was given full authority to establish a new program. The rehabilitation wing, she called it. Other creatures that had been labeled as impossible, dangerous, or irredeemable began arriving. Emily trained a team of handlers, teaching them her methods. Humans volunteered in large numbers, and other species slowly began to learn. 3 months after the reunion, Emily sat in Sector 7, now expanded into a proper family habitat. The Kareth rested with her head in Emily's lap while Emily brushed those beautiful obsidian tendrils. Nearby, the two cubs played, tumbling over each other in the synthetic grass, their movements growing stronger and more confident each day. 2 new human handlers, Tom Willis and Katie Morgan, worked in the adjacent enclosure with a crystalline predator that everyone said couldn't be approached. Emily smiled, watching them use the techniques she'd taught them, seeing that same patience and understanding she'd brought to the Kareth. She hummed her grandmother's old song, the melody that had started everything, and the Kareth's responding purr shook the ground like distant thunder. The galaxy was changing, learning a lesson that Earth's animal handlers had always known. There were no monsters. Only creatures that hadn't been understood yet. And sometimes all it took was one person willing to see past the fear, past the violence, to the frightened soul underneath. Sometimes all it took was a foolish human who dared to care.